Hello everyone, welcome to Neon Rabbit. Today, we're going to continue our reading of Shattering Swords Volume 1. If you like the book, click on the link below to get a copy for yourself. And, of course, if you're enjoying the channel, go ahead and subscribe. Let's get to it. Chapter 2. The flow into the Gulf was rough as it always was these days. Climate chaos flooded and melted away the coasts regularly, but the high seas were always extreme now. A hurricane or tropical storm was always threatening. Patrice had only seen the entrance by a breadth. They sank through the phosphorescent corridors, the sea's muddled sound, and into the realm of the Dianas. An underwater colony lit for the most part by bioluminescent glow. Juliana's sleek personal submarine arose, shining silver from the water into the Diana's greeting port. As they emerged, she was daunted by the number of what was obviously engineered flora and fauna around her. How did a cult of neo-pagans reconcile themselves with this level of tampering? Patrice pulled herself out of the craft, aching. Tiny, rat-like creatures scurried around their feet. Cute, albino, and fluffy rodents worked disgusting yellowish blades as frontal teeth. These engineered animals cut into driftwood that had followed her craft's wake into the port. These folks had obviously been making use of whatever data Patrice had mined from the vaults of Christ Corp's R&D. The numerous beings around her wouldn't be seen in any textbook or naturalist's collection of work. 3 figures emerged from a parting gate, covered in violet shrouds, their eyes and hair barely visible through the sheer material. They spoke in the tongue of Esperanto, hoping to avoid any confusion. The dialects and mutations of American English had become so daunting due to migrations, mixing, and isolation of populations that this was often the most intelligent means of communication. Nearly a quarter of folks scattered round the former U.S. didn't speak English at all. Tia está tiu granda Juliana Angelo de Q Perulas? Asked the central figure in a booming baritone voice. The daunting giant of a body strode forward slowly. "We're here for the data Patrice left with you. That's it. I've come to request nothing else." "Surely, you must also hope to demand our allegiance as well. We've seen what you do with those who do not offer it to you." She held out her palm, generating a high-speed holographic video compilation of CEOs being hung from their headquarters. Bankers lined up and shot dead by the soldiers of the Confederation. Gated neighborhoods going up in smoke after blue flashes of light overtook them. "When we said, by any means necessary, we meant it. We waited for the children to go to Sunday school before we blew those neighborhoods," said Juliana with a scowl. The leader stood above her comparatively tiny form, menacing. She continued, "Would you rather have us let them keep people enslaved and finish off poisoning the planet? The purges were awful enough." "Are you certain your rule will not be as dangerous?" replied Priestess Jasper accusingly. "Will you seek to contain the vilest among you who wish to exercise their influence upon the earth? The psychological traumas wrought by this century and its patterns of abuse have not been removed from the unconscious minds of your leaders, though you claim to have none. That these forces will come to play out in your politics is more than certain." Suddenly, Juliana felt a remembrance of that voice, from somewhere deep in her youth. She attempted to access her memory enhancers before realizing they'd thoroughly shorted out for the time being. Her eyes darted to the others. "Can we just please get the data? I really don't have time for this feck. We've got to start giving people what we promised ASAP. Otherwise there will be unrest we just won't be able to handle or talk our way out of." Priestess Jasper turned and with a molasses gait proceeded down the hallway. Silently they followed. Only the sound of chirping birds and the scuttle of small ground-dwelling beasts stirred the sonic atmosphere of the colony's purring air purifiers and the concealed machinery. After 10 tense minutes, they found themselves walking across a pedestrian bridge. A good 100 feet below, thronging crowds engaged in all matters of activity. It looked celebratory, but she simply couldn't tell if this was just a normal day in the life of the colony's people. High above them was a transparent dome. Sea beings were visible moving near and across its surface. "Impressive, isn't it?" muttered Patrice. She simply nodded, trying to imagine what it had taken to accomplish a project so massive, with Christ Corp so close. something so antithetical to its machinations. This was at least on par with the Mars One colony in many ways. There had to be some serious hard currency involved in this operation. It dawned on her like lightning. A drug trade was being maintained in the South despite the obstruction of the brutal totalitarian government. High-quality drugs, not garbage, had been available at some part of every city she'd conquered. Not to mention black markets for food and medicine, though she'd never found any facilities for production. All of it had to be coming from somewhere. Now it was obvious. It explained Jasper's nervousness. The Confederation was going to end the black market purely by virtue of decriminalizing drugs, making food and medicine free, public goods. Slyly tapping Patrice for attention, she signaled in American Sign Language. "We've got to watch our backs. They don't want to help us, I'm certain. What we're trying to do is going to cost them a hell of a lot of money. I have the feeling these folks won't play nice. As soon as we get near the sub again, be prepared to run like hell." His eyes widened. Tapping the side of his red trench coat thrice, he indicated he was armed to the teeth. She'd kill for subvocal texting right now. If they were going to get out of this mess, it was definitely going to take a plan or some ingenious improvisation. The latter looked more obvious. Patrice had been out of the game for a period of which she was not sure. They didn't speak anything of the particular importance of last night. The sharpness necessary to survive these situations may have long atrophied. Almost an hour after passing through several elaborate conduits and walkways, the five reached what appeared to be a library or some bureaucratic hall. Lush with life as all the rest of the colony, animals swarmed everywhere. Books and hard drives were all sealed behind flush glass cases, protected from the roaming miniature monkeys, insects with eye-wrenching phosphorescent glow, and of course the rat-like eaters of decaying bark. They seemed ravenous for wood that was even remotely in a state of degradation. "What's up with all these rats?" inquired Juliana, obviously becoming a bit squeamish. "Carbon in various arrangements, ammonia, nitrogen, rot of the world," said one of the two formerly quiet priestesses. "Best to keep it contained in dung when within enclosed environs. The air purifiers and flora are simply not enough. Consider them insurance. They eat everything that would create imbalance. Compounds extracted from the refuse go to needed places. Managed better than the garden of life you fools above have allowed to degrade into toxic ruin. We have been developing this sanctuary since long before its inception as a tangible thing. Since you were in diapers, you little anarchist street brat. Though it is good to see you've moved beyond being some yuppie's wasted cum, robbing our members and cursing us on every corner." The priestess coughed and hacked in a vomitous fashion. The sound was clearly identifiable. Yellowish ooze was visible, slinking from her nostrils. The pig plague of the Bay, 2025. Juliana began shaking violently as her cybernetic links repaired themselves with the help of several million biological machines coursing through her bloodstream, leading to a striking fury of pain across her central nervous system. Deep memory returned. Flashback. May 1st, 2025. San Francisco. Juliana Angelo, 16 years old. Red Resistance was only in its beginnings, its proselytizers yelling atop the rubble of buildings exploded by her gang. The Third World War remained 3 years away. Big box stores sacked and the Lil Berets helping offenders escape with a barrage of Molotovs and heavy gunfire. State troopers smoked the air with biological weapon, which, while not deadly, made you feel like shit for decades and devastated your lungs. She wasn't dumb enough to come without a breathing apparatus. There were, of course, the regular hippies begging for peace among the overarching chaos, asses kicked by the gangs and the cops alike. White suburbanite Wiccans were among them, hoping to stop it all with some delirious vision of prayer for change. A fantasy indeed. Believing that through only their focused intention on it all, somehow this nightmare collapse of Western civilization could be halted gently, thinking a new age would dawn purely through love. The Lil Berets had of course made fun of them and, yes, robbed them on a regular basis. The old mega-gangs used every available agency to garner cash for their projects. Juliana remembered those embarrassments, running away from the exploding canisters and screaming that they'd be back with a vengeance. The Dianas had been there from the get-go. Now the witches had power, real power, and they'd apparently become badass, drug-slinging crime bosses over the past 20 years. Diverging from their faith, they'd essentially become a secret corporate power, an unnamed criminal syndicate. Weird. But they certainly still carried a major grudge against the youth gangs of the past, the Little Berets in particular. End deep memory. By the time her memory core had played out, the rest had already made it to a dark room. It was clear to them that Juliana was going through the pangs of a reboot, so they let her be. She struggled to catch up. When she found them, Patrice walked to a casing, spoke Esperanto to the voice analyzer, placed his iris on the lock, and opened the box. A softly glowing crystalline sphere emerged. "We have to go now, right now, Patrice." "Go," spoke Jasper. "Do not return." She focused her countenance upon Juliana with an iciness that was unmistakable, even through the veil. The duo fled away from the colony with an adrenaline-fueled speed, weapons ready to go, and yet nothing happened. "What was that?" Juliana yelled. "They know me. They still clearly hate me. And nothing happened. Something's up." "Maybe the priestesses consider you less of a threat than Christ Corp," yelled Patrice over the machine's bleating. "No, something else is going on. Inferancunt merdo ni tuj Detroito." "What?" said Patrice incredulously. "Why would we go to that trash fire? Isn't that pretty much the worst place to take a breath of air, even now? Death by random rent-a-pig? Walking those streets is suicide. Never mind. Don't tell me that I'm right. I don't want to know." They continued to accelerate to greater and greater speeds, finally bursting upon the surface, and the wings of the craft unfolded. Plumes of brilliant azure shat from the exhaust. Heading true north, he saw the Big Easy pass beneath him in seconds. Juliana hadn't answered, and he was afraid to know in reality. The Confederation hadn't touched Detroit deliberately. It was close to being isolated politically, and gave a place for the anarcho-capitalists to roam free, exercise their passions, and stay out of the way. It was a goddamn nightmare. They'd begun plans to build their movement there in the mid-2020s as everything truly went to hell around the country. Venturous minds contrived to virtually take over the regional government, place its functions in private hands, and give their movement a real geographical area to express itself. Though the political philosophy in and of itself was nonsensical, some of the bastardo were pretty intelligent. In the attenuated society already beaten down by corporate power, it was fairly easy to accomplish the project. By the early 30s, it was game over. The city and its outlying areas had essentially become a network of fiefdoms backed by mercenaries. The logical conclusion came to pass. Needless to say, it was a complete shit show for the underclasses. The most grotesque night terrors of the prescient minds had come to fruition. When they began sailing along the sky with the sounds of tumultuous clouds murmurs beneath them, Jay glanced over to his whitened face. "Mom's there." "What? Really?" Juliana was going into her notorious analytic spaz fest. "You know how she rolls. She's cutthroat. Managed to take over a metric assload of the fiefdoms in no time. Practically a queen at this point. I suspect the fiefdoms were involved in the black markets existing parallel to the Christ Corp economy. It wasn't simply about making money. They were trying to destabilize and erode a fascistic theocracy at its core. They'll be after us next. If there's a long game involved, if they want to ensure that fiefdoms become the norm over the long run, I can guarantee you Mom's behind it. What the KLP intends on putting in place is almost impervious to such development. We'd be in their way, which means they'd have to do something drastic to stop us from implementing social ownership and the return of the commons. Something dirty, drastic, and deadly as fuck." Juliana continued rambling. This was what she was like when calculating, manipulating the complexities of potential scenarios, mixing and matching consequences, her irises dilated, powerful, ferocious. Below them roared the mighty Mississippi River, engorged by methane's melting of North America's highest reaches. Robot and human crews drudged through the muck, laboring to dredge and cleanse the wretched watery monster, filled to the brim with vile overconsumption's contamination. A seemingly endless series of industrial wastes and general garbage flowed within it. Along its edge, regeneration crews desperately planted trees set to grow at high speed along the banks. Even at their altitude, the construction of massive water purification plants was visible. gargantuan pipelines leading into the Great Plains which would, over time, refill Ogalla Aquifer, assisted by other pipelines snaking in from the Pacific. Patrice sighed as he beheld the project's magnitude, reflecting on early days, kids covered in punk rock patches trying to clear the waters with their nets, the banks with their poking sticks and cloth bags, manufacturing DIY recycling reuse centers. Constant fundraising to clean away the waste, and destruction wrought by horrifying hurricanes, never-ending tropical storms straight out of hell itself, feeding those made homeless with whatever scraps could be attained among the dumpsters. It was pitiful in comparison to what the KLP's coordinated effort was destined to accomplish. People en masse were starting to believe in themselves again. This was a true sign that humankind could one day become everything it should have attempted to be all along. The whirring of Silver Rocket's engines slowed as Juliana shifted downward to conserve fuel, not knowing if she possessed enough of the fiefdom's ever-shifting cryptocurrencies to afford more upon arrival. Boom-bust cycles were beyond prediction or reason in that region. What are you thinking about? You seem pretty pensive over there. Just about how absurd we must have seemed at first. No wonder we had such a hard time recruiting people. In our goddamn adolescent imaginations, we thought we'd pull off everything you guys are doing now. All fragmented, every little group working on its own separately. It clearly wasn't going to work. Everything just got worse. We were all exhausted by the time Christ Corp got its boot on our neck. What y'all are doing is incredible. I'm honestly a little jealous I didn't join you guys on real action. I mean, sneaking around, playing part-time detective, part-time spy was cool and everything, but getting real work done out in the world would have felt so satisfying. Results I could see and touch. Juliana scowled for a second and returned to a more jovial approach. Believe me, you had a better time than we did in a lot of ways. Meandering around in the middle of the night, gathering leaks and breaking into those assholes' boardrooms was surely hella more interesting than digging ditches. Not to mention having to sit through meetings with a bunch of revolutionist hardheads trying to reach agreements on even the most simple action plan. Besides, your risk-taking is going to make all the difference. You can't even imagine all the sick and elderly we have on hand. We just can't make cures with what we've got. Most of our biotech only works for people who get vaccines or treatments while they've got youth on their side. Our tech is so haphazard that my synthetic biology only works half the time. The elites in Christ Corp territory were pretty much all ancient, so of course geriatric care excelled. For them. Take into consideration that most our food relies on vertical farming. Most of the country's ag engineers were already working for CC subsidiaries or got straight up kidnapped by them. You know those poor bastards have vocal triggers planted inextricably in their jaws? If they talk, a tiny bomb goes off. It took the KLP and everything it could manage to pull off. Smart people getting things done by the skin of their teeth. Whatever we could jack, reverse engineer, whatever. We're going to be able to end global hunger in no time with what's in that pretty little orb in your pocket. Oh yeah, stash it somewhere else. The sheen within the sunset was an indicator of their nearing approach. Pollution makes for lovely sunsets. Magenta, vibrant purples, scarlet, and gold-tinted clouds painted the horizon before them. Sickly streaks of sunlight refracted among the myriad gases stretched, hanging across the skyline. It sent shudders down Patrice's spine, a reminder of World War III, 11 harrowing months of global conflict, ending, for the most part, because it sent the global economy crashing. The short war led to a crippling retreat or outright dissolution of the planet's dominant hegemonies, breaking the capitalist machine itself for a time. Chemical warfare was the norm during that aphotic year. Each attack had stretched glorious hues throughout Earth's barrier against outer space's void. Every now and then those unnatural clouds would ignite, brief moments when awe and abject terror overlapped. A wheezing voice came across the static on Juliana's telcom. "Approaching vessel. 320 Bitcoin for landing," followed by more wheezing. Pulling out 2 breathing apparatuses, she tossed one into Patrice's lap. Her biological machinery was no match for Detroit's spoiled air, including surprise toxins and biota. Far above, colonies on Luna shined through the blanketing smog. tiny, blistering dots of white, green, and blue, closely connected in the night's canopy. A place where the mega-rich had escaped the turmoil of Earth decades ago, all augmenting themselves to survive the lower gravity, living lives of peace, play, and bliss. Bastards. There ends Chapter 2 of Shattering Swords, Volume 1, by Severian Xavier. Again, if you like the book, you should click on the link below and buy yourself a copy. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss when the next chapter comes out. We'll see you next time.